Hi folks, and welcome to Philosophy According to Eddie, and we are going to be looking at metaethics today. Now, metaethics follow on from all the normative ethical theories that we've already looked at. Now, normative ethics are basically looking at how to be good. How is it that we do good things and avoid bad things? Metaethics, however, looks at what is good. What do we mean by this word good? Spend a lot of time talking about how we can be good and how we can avoid being bad, but we don't actually define what this word good actually means. So, we're going to have a look at that today. And I need to be thinking about, for example, what kind of language is being used when we're using moral language. Is it cognitive, i.e. it can be factual, and they are statements of fact, or is it non-cognitive? Is it non-factual statements? How do we define this word good? Is it a synonym for something else? So is something equivalent to being good? Or is it something on its own, out there to be found? Or is it something else altogether? And we must keep in the back of our mind the fact that a lot of people seem to believe that they have an innate sense of goodness. What is good and what is bad? Where does that come from, and how does that fit in? So all of these we'll be investigating. We're going to consider views from Plato, Epicurus, Bentham, Ross, Pritchard, Eyre, Barnes and Gebeth, all of whom believe that it is possible to say what is good and what is bad. And we're also going to have a look at Hume, Moore and Russell, who criticise these ideas. So, let's kick off with Hume. Hume talked about the fact-value problem, otherwise known as the is-ought problem. Now, this is looking at the problem of logic, because logic is our key tool when we're doing philosophy, but the problem is it doesn't work with moral language. Logic works with facts. This is this, therefore this is this. And those are the facts, or the is. However, what about when things should be a certain way, ought to be a certain way? Those are values. That's the ought section. My values say something is good, something is bad. Now, this is a problem because logic can't work very well with ethical ideas. Because if we take a standard bit of Aristotelian syllogism, which is the most basic form of logic, or one of the most basic forms of logic, A equals B, B equals C, A equals C. That is a classic bit of logic. All men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore... Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. Classic. It's that this is this, therefore this is this. The problem is, what about when we're trying to find values? A equals B, B equals C, A ought to be C. So, for example, you might say cows are sentient creatures. Sentient creatures have a right to life. Therefore, I shouldn't be wearing leather. Now, the first two bits are facts, or at least they are factual statements. Cows are sentient creatures have a right to life. Those could be argued to be facts, therefore, but then we jump to a value. You should or shouldn't do something. That isn't logical. You're going, this is this, that should be like that, that ought to be like that. Fact, value. Doesn't work. This moral judgment seems to have come out of nowhere. Now, okay, maybe we could change that round and go, well, if we have A should be B, B should be C, A ought to be C. Life should be preserved. Cows should have the right to life, therefore I shouldn't wear leather. All very well and good, the logic still follows. The problem is, that doesn't include any facts. So, if you're going A should be B, B should be C, A should be C, that also doesn't work. So David Hume is really saying it's all very well and good for people to tell us what we ought to do, but it's not based in fact, it's not based in logic. In other words, ethics, according to Hume, are totally illogical. And that leaves us with a problem. Does that mean that we shouldn't be ethical? Does that mean that we shouldn't try to be ethical? Pretty much everyone in the world would say, no, that's not a good conclusion. But how do we get over the fact-value problem? There are three approaches that we're going to look at. Naturalism, intuitionism, and emotivism. All of which think they have solved the fact-value problem in some way. The first option is naturalism. And naturalism is actually probably the most common approach to establishing what good is, even if we don't realise it. It suggests that good is a natural quality. Now, a natural quality is one that can be found, that can be discovered, and therefore is, in a sense, factual. It can either be found absolutely, so, for example, there is this sort of universal standard of good. Is it good? Well, does it measure up to that standard? Or it can be found relatively. So, in my culture, this is the measure of good. In another culture, this is the measure of good. But there's still a form of good, well, yeah, a type of good, sorry, not the form of good, that's Plato. But there's a type of good that can be used to measure our ethics against. Plato, with his idea of the form of good, is an absolutist. So he is saying that there is this absolute standard of good, but there are other people who would say that it depends on culture. Now, what this does is it makes ethical statements cognitive. It means that they can be factually tested, because essentially what you're saying is, if we go with the example of hedonism, which is Epicurus' idea, which is that pleasure equals good, you can go, well, if pleasure equals good, is it pleasant? Yes. Well, okay, then it's good. And the more that we go into this, the more of these theories we can find. Situation ethics. Is it loving? Yes. Well, then it's good. So love, therefore, is our gold standard. That is our natural quality that is good. How about utilitarianism? The greatest good to the greatest number. Is it providing the greatest good to the greatest number? Yes, then it must be good. It carries on. In fact, many ethical theories are naturalistic theories, the idea that good is a quality that can be found. It's very appealing, because if it's cognitive, it can be tested, and then it fits into logic. Because you can say, even if you can't say, for example, A equals B, B equals C, A should be C, if you've got a fact, so eating is pleasurable, pleasure is good, therefore eating is good. That's logical. That is based on facts, because good is now a factual quality. So it's very appealing, because it makes philosophy and ethics fit together in a way that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. Now, the problem established by Moore, G.E. Moore, was that you get what's called the naturalistic fallacy. And he said, well, okay, let's just try running a few logical experiments to see whether they work. So, good is a quality of some kind. Let's use the example of hedonism, and therefore pleasure is good. So, good equals pleasure. Now, what if it's possible to think of a time when the quality that you're talking about is bad? So in this case, can you think of a bad pleasure? Well, chances are you probably can. We won't go into that now. But that would suggest if good equals pleasure, but it's possible to have bad pleasure, therefore good equals bad. That doesn't work. That's logically impossible. Let's try it with, say, situation ethics. Good equals love, that's our quality. Is it possible to think of bad love? Again, don't answer too quickly, but probably yes, in which case good equals bad. This is a problem, because it suggests that these natural qualities are not, in fact, a natural form of good, and that we've actually made a mistake somewhere. The other way that he looked at this, perhaps a slightly more simple approach, is looking at whether sentences make sense. Eating is pleasant, but is it good? Okay? Now, if we're going by hedonism, we could therefore swap pleasant and good at any point. So, eating is pleasant, but is it good, can become eating is good, but is it good? The problem here is the first sentence makes sense. We look at it and go, eating is pleasant, but is it good? Good question. Eating is good, but is it good? That doesn't make sense. But logically, if pleasure equals good, those two sentences should both make the same sense. It doesn't work. So, perhaps good is not a natural quality to be found. Now, we can compare this to Aristotle, actually, who said that pleasure is good, but not the good. So, pleasure indicates what is good, but pleasure itself is not good. Now, on that basis, that's good, because it suggests, well, that's positive, because if the pleasure is bad, if there's like a bad pleasure, then it may well be that the pleasure is indicating where the good is, but we're making mistakes. So the pleasure itself isn't good, and so it just tells you where the good is, and we're just getting mixed up. So what we think is pleasure isn't actually pleasure. And that was the argument of hedonism in the first place. But it's still unsatisfying. It still suggests that pleasure can guide us in the wrong direction, so it can't be used as an ethical standard. So a lot of ethical theories base the idea on the fact that you can measure good, but actually, logically speaking, it doesn't always stand up to the test. This led more on to think about intuitionism. Moore went on to suggest that good is real, but it's not a natural fact, i.e. it can't be discovered, it can't be measured, but it does exist. This is intuitionism. And he suggests that we can sense good, but there is no true good to be found. And likened it to, say, a colour. Let's use the example of yellow. There are things that are yellow, we know that, but there is no such existence of the yellow. There's not this golden standard of what yellow is. Yellow is not therefore true or false. It is perceived, but it's not true or false, and yet we can identify it. We know what yellow is, we understand it, even if it can't be cognitively proven. Now let's think about this in terms of good. Things are good. There is no existence necessarily of the good out there. There's no fixed goodness. Good is not true or false, it's non-cognitive, and yet we can identify good. So goodness, therefore, we can sort of sense it within us, but we can't factually measure it. It's a non-cognitive approach to it because it can't be verified. But what we can say about it is, when a thing is good, it is right to like it. So when we sense this goodness, it is right to like the thing that we sense goodness in. Now this is very similar to the idea of quality that comes up in the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's not really about Zen Buddhism, it's not really about motorcycle maintenance, but it's a very interesting philosophical dialogue by Robert M. Pirsig, and I'd recommend anyone to read it. So, as a non-cognitive approach, we're sensing goodness. And this is quite appealing because it explains why we feel like we can know good even if we can't prove what goodness is. We can sort of tell, even if we can't measure it. However, naturally, there are objections. It assumes this sort of bizarre good sensing part of our brain, so our brain can just sense good. And that's quite a wild leap. That's an inductive leap to go, oh yes, we can just sense good. Well, how can you prove it? I mean, we can tell that we can sense vision and smell and hearing. You're doing it right now. Not smell, but vision and hearing, certainly. But how do you prove that we can sense good? It's an inductive leap. It also assumes that good is a priori, i.e. it can be proven in a tautological manner. Go back to verification principle and religious language if you need to brush up on what that means. And Russell claimed this. Bertrand Russell claimed this in his early life, although later he came to move away from it. And Moore seems to claim as well that good was this a priori truth that existed within us, an innate knowledge. That's very contentious. There's really no proof for this statement. Hence why Russell moved away from it. Now, the non-cognitive approach is not particularly useful when it comes to applying ethics, because one of the reasons for studying ethics is to try to work out how to do the right thing. Well, if you say, oh yeah, you just sense it, well, how does that help us? How does that help you to work out what's good? You just have to, oh, just try to sense it. You know, it's almost as if someone's saying, oh, which way's north? Oh, just try to sense north. Try to sense the magnetic field. You'll get there in the end. It's not very satisfying. And also, this idea that there are non-natural properties in general, so that good is this thing, this property that is non-natural, it fails Occam's razor. It doesn't make sense, the idea that good would be this non-natural property floating around. You could argue that colours, therefore, fail this test, but we can see the colours, that we can see them with our senses. Good, we can't see good, we can't perceive it. People have different ideas of what is good. So, from a purely Occam's razor, principle of parsimony approach, this doesn't work particularly well. And that's why those who were more interested in verification moved on to ideas such as Emotivism, developed by A.J. Ayer. Emotivism comes to the conclusion, following on from the previous two theories, that ethical statements are just completely meaningless. It's based on Hume, and it's a logical positivist approach, so therefore it's looking for cognitive verification. Because cognitive verification cannot be proven for any ethical statement, it therefore is basically nonsensical. Because there is no justification for any claims that anything is right or wrong. If we go back to the is-ought problem, what the logical positivist suggests is that all that does is prove that ethics therefore are meaningless, and therefore we shouldn't talk about ethics at all. Ayer suggested that ethical sentences, evince emotions but are meaningless. Now, evince is an interesting word. Initially, Ayer had suggested express. So ethical statements express emotions. But he changed it later to evince. Basically, they display emotions. So expression suggests that the emotions exist, and that leads on to other logical problems. So he suggested that ethical sentences evince emotions, they suggest emotions, but they're actually meaningless. It doesn't matter, you can say anything, and although it may be true to you subjectively, there is no objective way of proving it. So it really is based on what you think, what you feel about things. So let's take an example. Someone might say, veganism is wrong. Now, I might say that. You can see I'm wearing leather at the moment, so subjectively, that is true. If I would say veganism is right, subjectively, to me, I would be lying, I would be wrong, I would be making a logical error because I am wearing animal-based clothing. However, although it may be subjectively true or false, there is no objective, verifiable truth. If I would say veganism is wrong, yeah, it works for me, but you couldn't prove that. You couldn't verify that. And therefore, the statement veganism is wrong becomes meaningless. So does the statement veganism is right. So there's a statement about anything being right or wrong. And that was Ayre's idea, and that is why Winston Barnes talked about the idea of the killing boo, or boo-hurrah theory. The idea being that, essentially, because these statements are meaningless, they may as well just be noises, you know. When you say killing is wrong, you may as well be going, killing, boo! Or you might be going, veganism, hurrah! But those are just noises. They're not statements of truth. They're essentially meaningless. They're just expressing what you think. So emotivism really is, well, it's based on emotion. All you're doing is telling people what you think about something. Does that therefore suggest that there is this relativist approach to ethics where what I say is right for me. What you say is right for you? I would say no. That's not the conclusion. The conclusion is there's just no point talking about ethics. If you say what's right for me is right for me, you're still talking in meaningless language. You're essentially going, what I say is hurrah, is hurrah. It doesn't make any sense. Now the problem is that this is a very difficult situation for ethicists because it undermines the entire field. But what it's doing is it is conflating proof and justification. So let's have a look at that. I can't prove that going out and kicking a puppy is bad. There's no verifiable proof. But I have justification for saying that kicking a puppy is bad. A lot of people disapprove it, but also, you know, it'll cause pain to the puppy, various other things, which justify me in thinking, yes, that's bad, even if there's no proof. So you could say the bar's just set far too high. The logical positivists are ignoring justification because they're focusing totally on proof. They're blinkering themselves. It undermines opposition to an ad hominem critique of a bad argument. Now, if you look to the bad arguments that we've discussed, an ad hominem attack is if someone says something and you go, well, you would say that because you're, I don't know, stupid, or you are X, Y, or Z. Those are ad hominem attacks. They attack the character of a person. They're not logical. They're not a good argument. All you're doing is trying to turn people against the person saying it. It's all based on emotions. But the recognition of ad hominem as being a bad argument is a fundamental part of logical discourse. It was one of the things that Aristotle came up with. So what this theory is basically saying is that the ad hominem attack, which is illogical, should be allowed because it's, it means nothing, and therefore it's essentially logical positivists undermining logic. Doesn't seem to work very well, does it? And finally, from a practical point, it destroys ethical discourse. There's no point in discussing ethics if all it is you going boo or hurrah. So the whole idea of emotivism really doesn't get you any further. All it does is it causes problems. Now, someone who's responding to that might say, well, tough. Sometimes the truth isn't pleasant, deal with it. But it's not a satisfying argument. There is an alternative option, one that's been presented latterly by Alan Gewerth. Morality may not in fact be based in logic, but in interaction. We as a species are an interactive, interdependent one. No person is self-sufficient. So, morality therefore could come about as part of those interactions, not in fixed points, but in the flows between people. This is a very postmodern approach to the idea. Rather than trying to separate things out into fixed points, this idea of there being a single good, a single bad, or just saying it's all meaningless, a very categorical approach, looking at the flows and the relationships. So good and bad, therefore, become interactions, relationships. We understand good and bad based on how it affects people. So the principle of generic consistency suggests if I think it would be good if it happened to me, there's a good chance that it would be good for other people, because it would create that balance, that flow that's needed for us to become interdependent. Now, the outcome is very similar to Kant's categorical imperative, but rather than it being logical, it comes about from observing the flows. So although they're similar ends, they're very different. We're following the affective. The affective is how we feel, how we interpret. It's not logical, it's emotional. It's about how things seem. A lot of research onto the affective was done by Nigel Thrift in the late 90s into the early 2000s. It's worth looking at. So there's no singular good or bad, it's all within these flows. And this is a very different approach, and it suggests it's a very human thing, but currently it's not a massively accepted branch of ethics. So there you have it. We've looked at metaethics. We've looked at the idea of ethics being natural facts, intuitive ideas that are non-cognitive, and simply being emotions, little better than going boo or hurrah. And we've also looked at an alternative idea that ethics come through interactions and flows rather than from logically provable or testable ideas. So if you've got any questions, then let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching and see you later. Winston Barnes, ethics are not real. Winston Barnes, it's only what you feel. Bad things go boo, good things hurrah. Winston Barnes, Winston Barnes.